Hello, Newton, and welcome to another edition of Conservative Corner. I am your host, Tom Mountain. We are a monthly talk show that deals specifically with issues pertaining to the Garden City, and we deal with those issues that perhaps would not be discussed in shall we say, an alternative way. By that I mean, we see things from the free market, capitalist, conservative viewpoint, and we are, as Republicans, the minority party in Newton, but certainly, as our next guest can attest to, Newton was not always specifically and thoroughly Democrat. There was a large Republican presence in the city, and hopefully, as I see it, as we see it, there will be in the future. But nevertheless, we cover the issues of the day, and we are Newton residents, and we are, shall we say, the loyal opposition on this show. In the aftermath of last week's really, I would say, stunning override victory, and I say that with some pride and with some amazement, having contested overrides over the years, going way back 20 years ago, and it is more than appropriate that we have with us, I guess, tonight, former Alderman Paul Coletti. And Paul, it's such a delight to see you here. It's been such a long time, my friend.
Old buddy.
And Paul was alderman from 1978 until 2009, and you were also the long-term head of the finance committee in the city of Newton. And actually, I got my political start, so to speak, with fighting the first override, and I believe it was 2001, a very long time ago. We were very young men back then,
Yes.
Paul. We had just entered middle age, so to speak. And now we're technically senior citizens, but nevertheless, it was a very interesting time because at the time, in 2001, we had a major override. And it was beset by scandal. There were letters, anonymous letters that came out purporting to be from the no override side. And I clearly remember you and Alderman Lenny Gentile here sitting at this table in the studio debating, I believe it was Mayor Cohen and the superintendent of schools. And it was a wonderful debate, which I insist that you and the other alderman won at the time. But unfortunately, we lost that override. But there were more to come, and we had our ups and downs over the years. But last week, again, to our utter amazement, two things happened. Number one, the voter turnout was 33%. 1/3 of the voters of Newton came out to vote in a snowstorm, in a bad snowstorm, which really was astounding. I was at the polls. I didn't expect more than 10, maybe 15% would come out. And we were hoping the elderly would come out because they would vote in favor of us. And they came out, and they rejected by 1,000 votes, the big override, shall we say, while 1,100, while keeping the special what is one called depth services for the two schools, which are Franklin School and Countryside School. They did approve those, but they rejected the main override. And what's astounding are some of the districts in the city that voted against the main override. Now, we actually, in the no override part, we would more or less try to instill in the citizens of Newton that in our economic situation in the state and the country, with inflation through the roof, with gas prices, home heating oil, et cetera, this is the worst time to have an override. So, for example, with those people who are on marginal, who are living, on fixed incomes, the elderly, the retired, call them what you will. Those were our core constituents that we saw. But to our amazement, what is the wealthiest neighborhood in Newton? And that is Ward 7. That's Chestnut Hill.
Waban.
Oh, Waban. Okay, but
per capita.
But if you look at
Chestnut Hill in terms of property value.
Yeah, if you look at Chestnut Hill, for example, this is a group and that fixed incomes and saving a few dollars on tax bills is not really a priority. Yet for economic reasons, yet despite that fact, all 4 precincts in Chestnut Hill and Ward 7 voted against all 3 overrides.
And that's the mayor's backyard.
That's the mayor's backyard.
Mayor Baker's backyard.
Exactly.
He's the ward alderman, and he supported the override.
So the point being is these people who, it's a very wealthy area, the zip code 02467 is one of the wealthiest in the country. And they voted against the overrides, but they voted on principle against the overrides.
Absolutely.
And that really should tell you something. So we were extremely pleased. You were instrumental in this, and we were very glad to see you. You've been here for a while, and you've retired for a while from politics.
2009.
But still, we were very pleased to see you make a comeback, so to speak, and you were very prominently involved. And there was a very extensive email that went out with your person on it, and you talked about why we should vote against the override. And I think that made a significant difference.
Did the Beacon Heights, I did the interview.
And you
over
did
there
that,
with
too.
Connor Siemens, in other words, and said how disingenuous this
And that
override
was so important, because you, above all, having been the finance committee chair for so long,
longest in history.
would know the issues. And 14 years ago, it's been 14 years since you've been on the Board of Aldermen, so there's a lot of maybe newer residents in town. There's certainly a lot of newer aldermen who may not necessarily know your legacy, but you
I
were
ran,
really,
by the way, in 2019. And if you download my statements at the candidates forum, I predicted this override.
okay. That's also amazing from that you did that. But nevertheless, tell us how, with your extensive experience in Newton politics and as the head of the finance committee for so long, while we can say that we did it, that we in the no overrides side did it because we just had, the right issues and we had principle on our side, but tell us how it really happened. How did we do this?
Well, when other people were calling me and saying how they were approached, people who really didn't have the ability, to make an impact. And I dissuaded some of those people because I didn't want them. Some of them were business people, and I said, you kind of have to be careful because the people will get vindictive, especially if it's defeated. So I said, lay back, but get involved, but watch what's happening and keep in touch. And then suddenly some of the other people started calling me, and I don't want to mention names, I don't know if that's important or not, and they said, we're getting involved and we need your input. You need to respond and react to what's really happening. So I started having meetings behind the scene. I met with the assessing department. I didn't go to any of the meetings because sometimes when you play your cards too soon, but my life, when I left politics, it was because I said that one person couldn't make a difference anymore. And you remember I charted the budget that year.
I remember.
And the other 23 aldermen swore vengeance against me because I took the power out of their hands. But the secret about that was that the budget doesn't end until November. And this is what we're leading into with my discussion with you now. The budget doesn't really end until November, when we just recently set the tax rate. And the last tax rate we set back in November is the largest tax increase in the history of the city. Okay? So if you look back over all those years with the overrides, this was a decent, and I always say, if you can't run the city with $16 million more than you got last year, then you should all be out of office. So knowing that, and then this document, which everybody, if one way or another, you'll probably never get a chance to get a hold of this, but it's called the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report.
Yes.
Dave Wilkinson, you mentioned him earlier. He and I put this together.
He was a former comptroller.
For years,
yeah.
for many years. Him and Larry Marino worked with me. And so we put this, the city puts this booklet together every year to present to our bond council people and to maintain our very few communities do this thorough report. And so I actually met with the new comptroller and I kind of gave him a few ideas about the upcoming budget because technically the comptroller is responsible for producing the budget. And they take the mayor's budget and they put it into a format, 570 pages, whatever it is, and with personnel. But sometimes you keep doing the same thing over and over again, and you don't have to. And in the back of my mind, I kept saying, somebody has made a decision, and it was the mayor's office, to put a whole bunch of people out front, and don't give them any information. Don't talk, be as non-transparent as possible. But get them, and you saw me in the Beacon Heights say to them, these are a bunch of people who love the schools, and they've been convinced to go out and stand in the middle of a highway and possibly get run over in order to defend this, but they don't know why they're defending it, except they've been told that it's absolutely necessary.
That they have to.
So You know, so those people, unfortunately, and those are the people who I said needed to understand that the no people aren't against raising taxes or spending more money when it's necessary. But there's so much money that came in, and this book displays it. All the way, but this was the June 30th of 2022. Those are the last results that we've had that showed the city's financial position. And it's very interesting because as I went through this and met with the people that I needed to, I started to say there was $80 million hidden inside of this budget, which was actually the end of last year. So I said to the no people, look, you've got to convince people that, number one, it's an election in the wintertime, when the elderly are all down in Florida or away, when public schools, are were the only people who were around, private schools were out on vacation,
Yep.
and basically they were hoping for a bad day because how are the poor and the elderly and the other people going to show up?
Do you think that the timing of this was deliberate? Where you mentioned
Yes.
a lot of the elderly are in Florida,
Absolutely.
the private schools are off.
And the reason,
I thought
you know
so, too.
why? Because the superintendent and the mayor were saying to everybody, it's an interim superintendent, were saying, we can't do anything. We have to prepare two different, you know something? They could do a budget in 5 days right now. Take the previous budget, which you just approved, that reflects back to the budget that you had. Factor it up by 2.5%, like we do the values every year on people's properties. We don't go in and reassess everybody every year. 2 out of 3 years, you factor it based on comparable sales. They can pass a $17.2 million budget without even breaking a sweat in 2 days if they really wanted to do the right thing. And then spend the next 3 months, instead of poring over a bunch of numbers that never change, do the best that you can. A wage freeze, hiring freeze, but you really have to settle these contracts now. You got to get them settled.
So, but just getting back to the specifics of the override, so what you're saying is that the city was flush with money, and
And they have to admit it.
and the override was unnecessary because there was so much money out there that the city had.
They had $63 million in COVID money in 2 years. And in these 2 previous years, both years they took $4.2 million out of the COVID money and used it for the budget. So, it's disingenuous.
So why in the world would they ask for an override at this time?
You know why? Because if you conditioning, because every time they had an override proposal, it's cut down the amount of time in between.
Yes.
They figured that they could cut this by 3 years. Instead of going like 11 years before you hit the wall, they were trying to put, and you got to remember, to the people at home, an override like this one is forever. So
Yes.
it's $9.1 million every year from now on.
Yep.
The debt service ones aren't. They're only, but things were happening. For instance, and I'll give you one example. When the Zerva School was done, $52 million, and they didn't even bother to apply to the SBAB to get funding, a reimbursement.
Even though they could have.
Well, no, because you know why? They're chomping at the bit to do these projects as well as the preschool program at Horace Mann. In other words, these were things that people figured, we'll slip them in and no one's going to care. And if they do care, they're not going to be around to voice their opposition. But all I kept saying to everybody that I could possibly say it to is, what's the rush?
Yeah.
We need to spend the next 3 months taking, for instance, let me give you an example. Eversource has a $15 million lawsuit against us right now because they disagree with the personal property tax that the assessing department put on them. Now, the mayor's office has taken that money and taken it out of the $28 million that's in the reserve. And they say, we can't spend this money because we may have to give this money back to Eversource. Well, guess what? The assessing department, in all the years that they were under my control and since I've left, have never lost a case in the commercial, appellate tax board. And if anything, we might have to spend $100,000 to hire counsel, appraisers, and professional people to beat that back. And to be honest with you, the only way that money can be put back into the surplus where it can be used, all right, rather than an override, is the assessors, who are a scapegoat for the mayor, agree to ask the mayor if it's okay for them to put it back. And the mayor has said to them, don't even try, because that's a good $12 million that no one's even going to know where it is.
Oh, God. You know, Paul, one of the things that we had heard from when we began our No Override campaign was you and the listeners, I'm sure, remember question 1 on the November ballot. Now, question 1 was the so-called millionaire's tax, and the Mass Teachers Association, the umbrella teachers union for all the unions in the state, the
Right.
teachers unions, spent $23 million to get that passed, and it passed. But it was money well spent, as they see it, because they're getting $1 billion over the next decade. Now, we had heard that based on their success, they in turn told the local teachers unions in various communities, okay, we won here. Now, you try to get an override in your communities, try to do that as best you can, and ally yourselves to the local teachers unions, and ally yourselves to the politicians, and it will probably pass. And that supposedly, again, this is through the grapevine, Newton was the test city, so to speak, where they would use Newton and to successfully pass a large override, and it failed miserably.
Yeah.
It
But
failed
the funny
miserably.
part about it is that, I know of corporate people, especially people in Wellesley and a few other communities, that are in the process of moving their businesses up to New Hampshire. And so there will be a flight of quality jobs for people, because of that kind of taxation policy. It worries people who try to run businesses and employ people and try to earn a living. So, so basically, this overtaxing, this thought that you can take money away from people, just like the government right now wants to do. They want to tax your retirement funds before you even take them. In other words, this concept is, it's not just conservative. It's wrong.
Exactly.
It's wrong. And until my motto in my life, in my politics and everything has been, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Exactly.
And that's why my whole life I've always been willing to stand up. I stood up on the closing of the Emerson School the 3 months after I was elected in '78, because I knew that 5 more schools were going to close. You need to see around the corner. And I realized that if I didn't get the best deal for those Emerson kids to merge into the Countryside School and become one of the best schools in the system, and Upper Falls was able to, have a rebirth up there. It's now, not what it used to be. And the point is, it took 30 years. Sometimes you wait that long to get vindication when you take a position like that. The mayor and the school committee, but I put it up there and said, I support the closing. And then when the high school closed, those kids lost their identity and went to 5 different schools.
Right.
But they've done things. For instance, they're not doing the Ward School. They haven't even started the real plans on some of this stuff in order to even be ready to look for a debt service override. But they may borrow a little bit of money on that debt service money, what are called bond anticipation notes, in order to get going on the plans.
But Paul, the schools really tried to frighten the voters, as they always do, into voting for this. And of course, they say we have to lay off teachers, this and that. And then, of course, they lose the override. But, let's face it, they're really not going to do that.
But the teachers are the ones who are they feel so neglected. And what I've said to many of them is that, listen, now you have to strike while the iron's hot. You need to, never mind lining up in the hallways with signs
Yeah.
and showing them to you. They have to threaten to strike. They need a contract, and their money is there. And if the city ever wants the credibility of being able to get an override, you need to show that you don't start at 0%. If you look at Dave Wilkinson and I put this book together on how to pass budgets in the future, and the point being that whatever the increase is, and this year it was almost 2.9, almost 3%. You start at least 2.5%. 80% of the budget are salaries and benefits.
But, Paul, also, one of our main talking points to get people to vote against the override was the very real fact, that after the 1.5-year shutdown of our public schools, over 1,000 students left the system. And these weren't kids that graduated. These were kids that were in the school system. They left the system. Not only that, but we heard that 9 to 10 kindergarten classes had to be canceled because people had lost faith in the Newton schools. Now, and since then, just a year since then, the percentages have gone down. Now, the population of Newton has gone down. The population of school-age children hasn't gone down, but the number of children going to the schools has decreased. Again, why? Because they've lost faith in the schools, mainly because of the shutdown. So
Well, not just the shutdown, but stop and think. When Mount Alvernia announced that they were going to close the girls' school here in Newton, look at the uproar. And the worst part about it, and this shows you what they did, almost like what the city did, they already said that they had sold the land. Now, it's probably BC, because it's literally right in their backyard. But the point is, 2,000 people immediately stormed the place saying, no, we're not going to allow it. So the problem is that people left the schools because they became disenchanted with the curriculum and with what their children were being taught.
Yes.
And many of them saw in the national scene how people who came up to speak before the city council were arrested.
Exactly.
And when
Yeah.
that starts to happen, you start saying, wait a
mean
minute.
the school committee when they spoke before
Just
the-
like this recent gay situation and the plays and everything that's playing out in the schools, and people are saying, I want the ability to be able to decide whether I want my children to participate in
right.
Glad to Be Gay Day or some of these drag queen things that they were doing.
But you see, but our premise was that with so many less students in the schools and with the numbers declining, how can you possibly ask for a property tax override to benefit the schools when you have lower enrollment, when it's demonstrably lower, and yet the unions keep asking for more and more and more, and our premise was enough.
But you know, they're not really asking for that much. They can't even get 2% on the table. And now in a recent memo that was released, the school committee wants to charge teachers $10,000 a year. There used to be that their children could go to school free. In other words, you know, while they taught in the city. They're now going to make them pay $10,000 for their kids to go to school in Newton.
That's a benefit that they always had. But you know, also, when I started writing for the Tab a long time ago, as you recall, the first recipient, the first city employee who made over $100,000 back in 2001 was the then Superintendent Jeffrey Young.
Yeah.
After that, then soon there became 10 and 20.
Yeah,
And I'm wondering,
$165,000.
I'm wondering how many there are today. And there is such overhead in the Newton schools with administrators, curriculum coordinators that make an astronomical amount. And I mean, how many of these people actually make $100,000? Is there anyone who makes less than
Everybody in the Ed
$100,000?
Center makes over $106,000.
And my question was, what do these people do? Like, what does a fine arts coordinator do all day? What is a social? What do they do? What do they?
Well, one
describe
thing,
on
most of
video?
them leave early.
Exactly.
You know, but the point is, you know, that's the way it's happened. And
Yeah.
you know, believe it or not, you can the last numbers that have been published as far as the salaries in the Ed Center and the school department was back in 2018. If you go to the State Department of Revenue and look for those numbers, so you know, it's all about the transparency. People, and like I said previously to somebody, the smart people, unfortunately, the people who've lived there all their lives, they're gone already.
Yeah.
You know, the doors closing, a lot of baby boomers have decided this is the time to, Mayor Mann thought it was before. Now's the time. You're selling a house, you know, in a matter of days. The competition is unbelievable. Poor people who want to buy a small, beautiful house and get in the door in Newton, before they even get a chance to bid, the developers already come in at $100,000, $200,000 more. But some of these properties now are sitting on the market because they've done less than adequate. It's the kind of construction that doesn't belong here in Massachusetts. It belongs in LA.
But you know, Paul, what also we're seeing, and one of the gentlemen in the control room who graduated, I believe, in the class of '73 from Newton High, said that he remembers that high school was ranked #1 in the United
Yeah.
States. Now, in the last, and when Boston Magazine came out with its annual survey of high schools and school systems in general 2 years ago, Newton North and Newton South barely made the top 40 in the state, never mind the country.
Right.
There wasn't a single Newton elementary school in the top 20
Right.
in the state, and there were before. Some of our schools were actually ranked around in the 400th range, whereas Belmont and Wellesley had several of their schools in the top 10. So my point being is that the rankings of the Newton schools, the quality of the schools, the quality of education has dropped precipitously. And as an example, the U.S. News and World Report listed Newton North High School as number 10 in the state in 2010. Now it's at 25.
Yeah.
So it keeps dropping and dropping and dropping, and yet they keep demanding more and more money.
Well,
Excellence has gone out the window.
I would just say one thing. The beauty about Newton North is 33,000 square feet over there
Yeah.
is set aside for tech folk.
Yep.
And unfortunately, Newton North suffers because you're training carpenters, plumbers, and electricians, which is absolutely necessary.
Yes, of course.
And they do a great job. That's the benefit of spending that extra money when we built Newton North High School, because instead of sending kids to Keefe Tech or Minuteman Tech, they get that training here in Newton. And you know, the sad part about it is that most of these kids, if you stop and figure how much time they spent on their cell phones at home
Yeah.
and watching television when they were, and their parents weren't even around, you know, when they were supposed to be doing their studying and taking, you know, we've lost 2 years in these kids and in their speech and their, because they're not reading and
certainly.
things like that. So unfortunately, the reason why we're suffering this way is because the COVID, you know, turned everybody upside down. But you're right. The number one schools right now is Hopkinton.
Hopkinton, Norwell, I
Yeah.
mean Medfield,
Yeah.
all these districts
Yeah.
that you never heard of. So
Yeah.
I think that Newton is really living on its past reputation with superior
That was
schools.
always the case.
But the data is out there that shows that if you look at the rankings, Newton is not up there
Nope.
like it used to be.
And you can't, if you notice, they keep shifting people. Newton and Natick tends to transfer, you know, controllers switched, finance directors, Bob Palmer,
Yeah.
Dave Wilkinson went out there for a while and came back. It's a revolving door. Now,
You know-
this person we're hiring now is coming from Natick. I mean,
Natick.
what's that going to do?
You know, one thing, Paul, that I'm noticing, and we have 2 minutes left, and I know
The time goes.
time flies when you're having fun, but one thing that I'd like to add is that I put out I'm a member of the Republican State Committee, and I put an announcement out to all of my colleagues throughout the state. I said, listen, we beat this override in very liberal Newton, and if we could beat it here, you can beat it in your hometown, in your various communities, because it's coming to you. And sure enough, a school committee member from a Central Mass town contacted me, and she says, it's coming our way. Let's talk and find out how we can defeat it. And I said, listen, if we can defeat it, you can defeat it there.
The secret is to guarantee transparency, to force them. The thing that really hurt them was when they came out and Maureen Lemieux said that they did have $71
And this is the
million.
chief financial officer?
Yeah, and I said it's not just 71. I said it's 120. Look at the Community Preservation Act. Look at the
Yes.
Capital Stabilization Fund. Look at all the money that's hidden in this budget. And look at the funds that they've used
Paul,
for their pet projects.
We've got a minute left, and I just want to say in conclusion that you were a solid rock of common sense and fiscal responsibility in all the years that you were here. And in my tenure in the TAB, I was grateful to you for your counsel and for your even-keeled positions. And we miss you on the Board of Aldermen.
I
We
tried,
really do.
and I'm thinking about taking papers
I
out
hope you
again.
will.
Like I said to some of the people in the No campaign, it can't just be 4 of us that are out there trying to.
Exactly.
There's a group of 18 that are all the squad. We have a squad. We've got to get those people out and get rational people who are all prepared with transparency and to tell people the truth.
And Newton will survive over the next few years. We're
will.
not going to go bankrupt.
But we can do a $17 million budget without any fanfare tomorrow,
Yes,
make
indeed.
everybody happy, and wait and see how the numbers turn out, save some money between now and June, and then in November, everyone's going to see what did we all get into this whole fight about.
Exactly, and here we are, and thank you for appearing on our show. Thank you for coming out of retirement and working on the No Override campaign, and congratulations to your success in doing so, Paul.
Thank you, Tom.
It's
Thank you
indeed a
for-
pleasure.
Thank you for giving me the pleasure to talk to you.